Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I'm going to be doing my preview for Ferrari's 2025 F1 season. So of course this year is very exciting, very big year for Ferrari. Of course, Lewis Hamilton joining the team, 7-time world champion, joining the most successful constructor in F1 history is definitely something that doesn't happen every day. So of course, makes sense why there's so much optimism, so much excitement around Ferrari's 2025 campaign, as well as a lot of questions about how good will the car be this year. Now those are all questions we'll get onto shortly. But first, starting off this preview, I want to take a look at the team and some of the key individuals involved. So, the Ferrari team based in Maranello in Italy, as everyone knows. Team principal Frederick Vasseur. This is his third full season, I believe, at Ferrari. It definitely feels like he's definitely turned the ship around after how rocky things were at the end of 2022, start of 2023. Now, in terms of technical directors, this is a team with 3 different technical directors. For chassis, Loic Serra, aerodynamics, Diego Tondi, and for the power unit, it's Enrico Gualtieri. Sorry if I butchered the pronunciation of any of those 3 names. Definitely something that can happen. And of course, their engine is Ferrari, being the Ferrari F1 team. Now, taking a look at the results the past 5 years, this is a team that's been quite inconsistent from year to year, I would say, especially when you include 2020. 2020, of course, the year where their engine was basically neutered because it was found to be basically not necessarily in violation, but it was in a gray area in terms of the fuel flow, where basically they were putting fuel in between when the sensor would check. And so for 2020, engine was absolutely terrible, car was terrible as a result, and they were basically a midfield team. 2021, they definitely took a kind of rebuild, took a step forward. Engine was much better, and they were a low front running team, but still not really able to compete for wins at all that year. Now, 2022, of course, was that big chance in terms of winning both drivers and constructors championship. It was new year, first year of the new regulations, and their 2 main rivals, Mercedes and Red Bull, had basically been fighting tooth and nail for the 2021 championship. And I think, most people would say that for the first quarter of the season, they definitely had the best car. Didn't always make the best use of it at times between strategy, mistakes, reliability, the odd mistake from Leclerc, such as France. They definitely, made things much harder for themselves. Of course, the second half of the season for Ferrari was quite bad. I think even if they'd been able to fully capitalize on their pace the first half of the season, I really don't think they would have been able to win the 2022 title in the end. Of course, some of those changes, such as Technical Directive 39, which affected the floors, that definitely had a negative impact on their 2023 car as well. So as a result, definitely fell back a bit pace-wise, as you can see from the graph. They were able to get a win last year, a bit lucky with the circumstances and with Red Bull really struggling at Singapore, but nonetheless, a win is a win. 2024, again, I think expectations weren't really super high because of how dominant Red Bull was, but I think they were still a bit more optimistic in the sense that they were hoping that they would be able to fight for wins on a semi-regular basis. And that's kind of what we got. 3 wins for Leclerc, 2 wins for Sainz, so 5 wins, which is the most wins that Ferrari's had in a season since 2022, not including 2022, definitely the most since, I believe, 2018, I would say, because they got 6 that year, 5 from Vettel, 1 from Raikkonen. So I do think very competitive season, and they took the Constructors' Championship battle all the way down to the last race of the season, which I think is definitely something that they weren't expecting going into it. So I think coming into 2025, expectations are going to be pretty high for the car, assuming they have the same kind of positive trajectory that they had from kind of this midway point of last season onwards. I think they're obviously where they ended up towards the end of the season. They were, the best car, I would say about half or just over half of the tracks. I do think that because it's last year of the stable set of regulations, there's going to be a lot of optimism and very high expectations for Ferrari's car this year. Now, just to finish up looking at on past years, I just want to go over some of the key stats for last year's team. So second in the Constructors' Championship, 652 points. That being said, if Red Bull had 2 competent drivers last year, they probably would have ended up third. Average pole gap, third on pace, 0.339 seconds. An average minimum finishing position, interestingly enough, was ahead of Red Bull, 2.46, which ranked second. So again, a bit of the opposite of what's been the case traditionally for Ferrari. I would say the last 5 years or so, where they've traditionally been much better in qualifying pace than they have in race pace. Last year's car was actually the inverse, and given that points are scored on Sundays, not Saturdays, and given that Leclerc is such a good qualifier, I think honestly it's not a bad idea to prioritize race pace over quality pace. Obviously, you're going to have tracks like Monaco, Singapore, where that can be a real detriment. But I think overall, especially given how good of a qualifier Leclerc is, I don't think it's the end of the world to have a car that's slightly better in the races. Now, moving over to taking a look at Ferrari's drivers. Before we do that, I want to take a look at some of their kind of most well-decorated drivers in Ferrari's very, very long history. Of course, longest or oldest F1 constructor. So, looking at ranking all Ferrari drivers by how many Grand Prix starts they have for Ferrari, not a surprise, Michael Schumacher tops the list, 180 Grand Prix, Kimi Räikkönen second, 151, Massa third, 139. Charles Leclerc already fourth on the all-time Ferrari list, 126 Grand Prix starts. The end of the season, 24 races, so that means he should have 150. So that means he'll be one behind Raikkonen, assuming he starts all the races. So again, pretty close second on that all-time list. Bit of a surprise, but of course, with F1 calendars these days having 24 races, quite a few more races than even 5-6 years ago. Number 5, Vettel, 118 races, 6 Barrichello, 102, 7th Berger, 96, tied with Alonso, 9th is Sainz with 88, and 10th is Alboreto with 80. Now, when you look at podiums, not a surprise again, Michael Schumacher tops the list there with 116. His old running mate, his old number 2 driver, Rubens Barrichello, number 2 with 55. Vettel third on the same total, 4th Raikkonen 52, Alonso 5th with 44, and then Leclerc 6th with 43. So I think end of the season, another really, really strong season for Leclerc. I think he could easily get second on this list. 7th Massa, 36 podiums, 8th Lauda, 32, 9th Sainz, 25, and 10th Berger with 24. Kind of hard to imagine that Sainz got 25 podiums, but he was here for 4 seasons, so not too much of a surprise there, I guess, in that respect. Now, taking a look at their current driver lineup, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, arguably the best driver lineup in F1 that we've had, arguably since Rosberg and Hamilton, which of course ended at the end of 2016. I think Russell Hamilton comes close as well, and I think if Hamilton has a good season, I think you could definitely argue this ahead of Russell and Hamilton. Rosberg and Hamilton, I think it's going to be tough. Hamilton would have to have an absolutely insane season, statistically, I think, to even kind of be in the question of, being better than Rosberg and Hamilton back then. Of course, Hamilton is quite a bit older, and I don't think he's quite as fast as he was, back 2016 to 2013. But for talking about the 2 drivers, Charles Leclerc from Monaco, 27 years of age. This is 8th season Formula 1, 147 Grand Prix starts, 1,430 points. His career best in the Drivers' Championship is 2nd, which he achieved in 2022. Has never gotten better than that. So, of course, we'll be hoping that he can challenge for his first ever Drivers' Championship this season. Joining him, of course, new boy Lewis Hamilton from the United Kingdom, 40 years of age. This is his 19th season Formula 1, 356 Grand Prix starts to his name, which is 2nd all-time, only to Fernando Alonso, and 4,862.5 points, which is the most in F1 history. If I talked about his win tally, I believe that's 105. Most all-time, podium tally most all-time, don't know the exact number. And in terms of championships, tied for most all-time, of course, with Michael Schumacher. He's, of course, won the Drivers' Championship 7 times, which, like I said, a joint record. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of interest, a lot of intrigue about this driver lineup. You have Leclerc in his prime, arguably, I would say, 2nd best driver in F1 versus Lewis Hamilton. For most of his time in F1 was the best driver on the grid, and driver that many consider to be the best of all time. Whether I consider him the best of all time, I think, is a very, very hard question. But I definitely think at this point, being 40 years of age, he's definitely not at his peak. I think, arguably since 2020, 2021, probably hasn't been the best driver on the grid. Last couple years as well, being teammates with George Russell, qualifying gap has gotten worse every year. First year together with Russell, outqualified Russell by I think about 900ths of a second, and the gap has gone worse to the point where last year Russell outqualified him by 1 point. The median gap was I think 1.7 So I think there's going to be a lot of questions about Hamilton's qualifying pace. Race pace, I don't think there's any questions whatsoever. Last couple of years, his race pace has still been excellent, but I do think that there are very real questions about his qualifying pace. And that's definitely something that we're going to find out, where his qualifying pace is pretty early in the season. Now, taking a look at my race and quality model predictions, these are using the two models, so these aren't my own thoughts personally, but it is interesting to use these kind of as a baseline to see, what can we expect from this teammate head-to-head. So for modified race score, Leclerc 2.53, for Hamilton 1.78, and this of course takes both age and experience into account. Hamilton's age of course means that he's quite a bit lower than he would have been when he was 30, 35 years of age. This of course uses the front runner team model, so it's predicted points tally of about 550 points in the Constructors' Championship. So it predicts under that situation, Leclerc would score 54% of the team's points and Hamilton would get 46. Points difference 49 in Leclerc's favor, with an average finishing position difference of 0.78. Honestly, I don't think those numbers are too off. I think if that would happen, I think that would match most people's expectations. Of course, if you're a really hardcore Hamilton fan, you might expect or hope that Hamilton would completely wipe the floor with Leclerc, but I do think he's a very, very strong driver, and I think that'll be a very, very tall task, especially because of Hamilton's age and because of the fact that this is going to be his first full season at Ferrari. Now, the qualifying one is quite interesting. I do think my qualifying model really underrates Leclerc. My model predicts that even with taking into account Hamilton's age, that the median qualifying gap between the two of them will be 1.1 in Hamilton's favor. Again, qualifying and race model are independent, so they're basically not calculated together. Otherwise, it would be very, very hard to see how Leclerc could somehow end up ahead of Hamilton in the points tally, despite being outqualified by a median of 1/10 of a second. I think realistically, for qualifying, I think it's likely going to be the other way around. I would expect the qualifying gap to be about 1/10 and a half, maybe even 2/10 of a second. I think Leclerc is probably a better qualifier than Russell is. So again, taking the gap from last year and adding a little bit of time to it, I think is a pretty reasonable expectation. Hamilton's not getting any younger, so I don't think it's really realistic to expect the qualifying deficit, especially his issues with this current generation of F1 car, to really be magically fixed by going to a different team. 2026 is obviously a different question, given that it's going to be a very different set of regulations. Cars will handle quite differently. But I do think that this is probably going to be a tough season for Hamilton, and I would be very, very surprised if he was the better of the two Ferrari drivers. But nonetheless, I think really exciting season for Ferrari, and there's definitely going to be a lot of attention on the team and Hamilton to see how he does at his first season at Formula One's most successful F1 team. So there you go. There's my preview for Ferrari's 2025 F1 season. One more team to go, and that is, of course, your 2024 Constructors Champions, McLaren. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.